The sharp crack of a slap shattered the quiet hum of the airplane cabin. A collective gasp rippled through the rows of passengers, their eyes snapping toward the scene. Some held their breath, expecting an outburst. But the woman who had just been struck didn't react. Not with anger, not with tears. Instead, she calmly reached into her purse, pulled out her phone, and dialed a number. "She just slapped me," she said, her voice as steady as ever. On the other end of the call, a man's voice turned cold. "Which flight are you on?" The flight attendant standing before her smirked, completely unaware that within moments her entire world was about to come crashing down. Because the woman she had just humiliated? She wasn't just another passenger. She was the wife of the airline's owner. Before we dive into the full story, comment below where you're watching from. And if you love gripping stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe for more. As the final passengers boarded, the airplane cabin buzzed with the usual pre-flight routine. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, ensuring seatbelts were fastened and carry-ons were properly stowed. Among the travelers was Alara, a woman dressed in a simple cotton dress, her hair neatly pulled back. She carried no designer handbag, wore no expensive jewelry. Nothing about her appearance screamed wealth or status. She stepped onto the plane quietly, clutching her small purse as she located her seat in the business class section. Sinking into the plush leather seat, she exhaled softly. It was far more comfortable than the economy seats she was used to. She had traveled many times before, but had never indulged in luxury. Not because she couldn't afford it, but because she preferred a quiet, modest life away from attention. Today, however, she had allowed herself this one small comfort. Fastening her seatbelt, she gazed out the window, watching as the last of the luggage was loaded onto the aircraft. It would be a long flight, and she was looking forward to resting. But peace didn't last long. A sharp voice sliced through the air. "Excuse me, ma'am, are you sure you're in the right seat?" Alara turned her head. A tall flight attendant with perfectly styled blonde hair and a crisp uniform stood before her. Her name tag read Monica, and she carried herself with an air of authority. Years of experience had taught her how to judge people in an instant, and at this moment, she was certain that this woman did not belong here. Alara met Monica's piercing gaze and nodded before calmly reaching into her purse, retrieving her boarding pass. "Yes, this is my seat," she said, handing it over. Monica took the ticket with a slight frown, scanning it carefully. The seat number was correct, the class was correct, everything checked out. But something about this woman bothered her. She didn't dress like the other business class passengers. No tailored suits, no designer labels, no sparkling jewelry or expensive watch. She looked more like someone who worked for the wealthy, not someone who sat among them. Monica forced a smile as she handed the ticket back. "All right then," she muttered before turning on her heel and walking away. Alara settled into her seat, ignoring the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. This wasn't the first time she'd been judged for her appearance. She had long accepted that people only saw what they wanted to see. As the last few passengers found their seats, Monica continued her rounds, offering polite smiles and cheerful greetings. But as she passed Alara again, her expression tightened. Something about her didn't sit right. A maid, perhaps? A servant who had somehow managed to secure a business class ticket? The thought irritated Monica, but she forced it to the back of her mind. The flight was about to take off. She had more important things to focus on. The plane roared to life, rolling down the runway before lifting smoothly into the sky. Alara leaned back, closing her eyes. She had no idea that the woman who had just questioned her presence would soon do something far worse. And when the truth came out, it wouldn't just be a lesson in humility. It would be the end of Monica's entire career. The hum of the airplane filled the cabin as passengers settled into the rhythm of the flight. Some flipped through magazines, others scrolled mindlessly on their phones. Flight attendants moved with practiced ease, weaving through the aisles, distributing drinks, and fulfilling requests. Monica's heels clicked sharply against the polished floor as she moved through the business class section once more. Though she had other tasks to tend to, her eyes kept drifting, unbidden, toward Alara. There she sat, hands gently folded in her lap, her posture composed, her expression unreadable. Something about her presence continued to gnaw at Monica. It wasn't just that she looked out of place among the well-dressed, high-status passengers. It was her stillness, the quiet confidence in the way she held herself, as if she belonged here despite everything about her appearance suggesting otherwise. Monica had been serving business-class travelers for years. She had developed an instinct for recognizing them, those who carried themselves with effortless superiority, their status evident in their clothes, their mannerisms, their expectations. But Alara? She wasn't like them. She didn't have the air of someone used to being served. Monica couldn't shake the feeling that this was a mistake. A few rows away, Nathan, a sharply dressed businessman, adjusted his watch. As Monica passed, he leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a low voice. "Excuse me," he murmured. "I believe there's been an error. I don't think she's supposed to be here." Monica's lips curved slightly. "I was thinking the same thing," she replied smoothly. Alara overheard them, but her expression remained composed. She had been in situations like this before, where people assumed they knew her worth simply by looking at her. She chose to remain silent, but she could feel the familiar heat rising in her chest. Monica straightened her uniform and strode toward Alara's seat once more. Stopping beside her, she folded her arms. "Ma'am," Monica said, her voice carefully controlled, "may I see your ticket again?" Alara looked up, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. "You already checked it," she said, her voice steady. "I'd like to verify it once more," Monica insisted. Alara sighed softly. Reaching into her purse, she pulled out the ticket and handed it over. Monica snatched it from her grasp, scanning it quickly. Everything was correct. The seat number, the class, the boarding details. But instead of admitting she was wrong, Monica's smile tightened. "This ticket seems unusual," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Where did you purchase it?" Alara blinked. The question caught her off guard. "Why does that matter?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Monica ignored the question. Instead, she leaned in slightly, lowering her voice. "You do understand that business class has certain standards, don't you?" she murmured. "It's meant for a particular type of traveler." A tense silence settled between them. Nearby passengers had begun to take notice. Some shifted in their seats, uncomfortable, while others watched with quiet interest. Alara at Monica's gaze, her expression unwavering. "And what type of traveler do you think I am?" she asked. Monica forced another thin smile. "I'm only asking routine questions," she said smoothly. "We've had cases where economy passengers were mistakenly assigned business class seats." A soft scoff came from behind them. Vivian, a woman elegantly draped in a silk blouse, set down her glass of wine and turned her head toward them. "That's interesting," she said, tapping a perfectly manicured finger against the rim of her glass. "You didn't ask anyone else those questions? Just her?" Monica stiffened. "I?" Vivian shrugged, taking another slow sip of her wine. "I've flown business for years," she continued. "Never once have I seen a flight attendant ask where someone bought their ticket." Alara remained quiet, but she didn't miss the way Monica's face tensed. The flight attendant was trying to maintain her composure, but the cracks were beginning to show. Still, Monica wasn't ready to back down. With a clipped motion, she placed the ticket back onto Alara's tray table. "Enjoy your flight," she said, her voice taut, before turning sharply and walking away. Alara exhaled slowly, slipping the ticket back into her purse. She thought that would be the end of it, that Monica would leave her alone now. But she was wrong. Because Monica wasn't just irritated anymore, she was angry. And soon, her frustration would push her into making a mistake she could never take back. Monica stormed into the galley, her grip tightening around the tray in her hands. She could still feel the sting of Vivian's words, the weight of the passenger's silent judgment pressing down on her. It made her blood boil. She had worked this job for years. She had dealt with all kinds of people. But today, one woman, a woman who clearly didn't belong in business class, was making her feel like she was the one in the wrong. It was infuriating. From the other side of the galley, Sophie, a junior flight attendant, glanced up from where she was organizing refreshments. "Something wrong?" she asked, noticing the tension in Monica's expression. Monica let out a sharp breath, adjusting her posture. "No," she muttered, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. But Sophie wasn't convinced, and she had no idea that before this flight was over, Monica's one bad decision would cost her everything. Monica forced a smile, though the tension in her jaw betrayed her frustration. "Just handling some seating concerns," she muttered. Sophie arched an eyebrow but didn't push further. She had worked under Monica long enough to know that when she was in one of her moods, it was best to leave her alone. Back in the business class cabin, Alara sat with her hands folded in her lap, gazing out the window. She could still feel the stares of certain passengers. She could still hear the faint murmurs. This wasn't new. She had been judged before, sized up, dismissed, underestimated, but today felt different. This wasn't just judgment, it felt personal. She didn't know why Monica had fixated on her, why she had been singled out so deliberately. But one thing was clear, this wasn't over. A low throat clearing broke the silence. "You know," said Nathan, the man who had whispered to Monica earlier, tilting his head toward her. "If you had trouble getting a ticket, you could have just asked for an upgrade instead of taking someone else's seat." Alara turned to face him slowly, her expression unreadable. "I didn't take anyone's seat," she said evenly. Nathan smirked, lifting his glass of whiskey. "Sure." From across the aisle, Vivian let out an exaggerated sigh, rolling her eyes. "I don't know what's worse," she said, swirling the last of her wine. "Her being questioned like a criminal, or you pretending you know a damn thing about her?" Nathan scoffed but didn't argue. Instead, he turned back to his tablet, acting as if the conversation had never happened. Alara remained silent. She had nothing to prove to these people. But deep inside, something stirred, an old familiar ache. It was the same feeling she had felt years ago when people looked at her and saw only what they wanted to see. When they assumed her worth was determined by the way she dressed, the way she carried herself, the absence of flashy jewelry or brand names. She had learned long ago not to let it bother her. But today, something about it did. Time passed. Flight attendants moved up and down the aisles, serving drinks and attending to passengers. When Monica returned to the business class section, she wore the same polite mask she always did. She handed out drinks with a composed smile, as if the earlier confrontation had never happened. But the moment she reached Alara's seat, she hesitated. Only for a second. Then she set down a glass of water in front of her. "There you go," Monica said, her tone carefully unreadable. Alara looked at the drink, then back up at Monica. "Thank you," she said simply. Monica didn't respond. She turned and continued down the aisle, but her mind was still restless. She had been so sure that Alara didn't belong, and yet she had no proof. And that was what frustrated her most of all. But she wouldn't have to wait much longer, because soon an opportunity would come. A small moment, one where Monica could remind this woman exactly where she stood. And when that moment arrived, she wouldn't hesitate. The cabin remained still, filled only with the steady hum of the engines. Most passengers had settled into their seats, flipping through in-flight entertainment or sipping their drinks. The earlier tension had started to fade, but Alara could still feel the occasional glance in her direction. She ignored it, keeping her gaze focused on the endless sky beyond the window. But Monica? She wasn't done watching her. She moved through the aisles, her eyes subtly tracking every movement Alara made. At first it had been curiosity, now it was personal. There was something about this woman's calmness, her refusal to be rattled, that made Monica's irritation grow. She wanted to see her flustered. She wanted to see her embarrassed. She wanted to prove that Alara didn't belong here. The plane suddenly jolted as mild turbulence hit, causing the beverage cart to tremble slightly. Up ahead, Sophie, who had been pouring a drink for a passenger, quickly steadied herself. Monica, using the moment as a distraction, reached for a napkin from the cart. But then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw Alara rising from her seat. She adjusted the strap of her purse over her shoulder, then stepped carefully into the aisle, making her way toward the restroom. Monica's eyes narrowed. Without thinking, she immediately stepped in front of her, blocking her path. "Where are you going?" she demanded. Alara blinked, momentarily startled. "To the restroom," she answered. Monica folded her arms. "The business class restroom is for business class passengers only." Alara's brows pulled together slightly. "And I am a business class passenger." The air between them thickened. Nearby passengers subtly turned their heads, pretending not to listen while clearly listening. Monica let out a small breathy laugh. You know, she said in a hushed voice, it's okay to admit if you're in the wrong place. If you're more comfortable using the economy restroom, I can let you go there. Alara exhaled slowly, her patience thinning. I paid for this seat, she said, her voice steady. I have just as much right to use this restroom as anyone else here. Monica's smile hardened. She wasn't just trying to assert dominance anymore. She wanted Alara to break. But Alara? She wouldn't. And that only made Monica's resentment grow. Because the more she tried to knock her down, the more she realized Alara wasn't going to fall, and for Monica, that was unacceptable. Alara's voice remained steady. I have just as much right to use this restroom as anyone else here. Monica's smile thinned, turning cold. That's interesting, she murmured, tilting her head slightly. Because I've never seen a business-class passenger without a single luxury item on them. No watch, no jewelry, no designer handbag, just a simple dress. A few passengers shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. Across the aisle, Vivian let out a quiet scoff, but remained silent. For now. But Alara? She didn't flinch. I didn't know my outfit needed your approval to use the restroom, she replied, her tone perfectly even. Monica's jaw tightened. She was losing control of the situation, and she hated it. She had expected Alara to get flustered, maybe even retreat in embarrassment. That's how it always worked. People backed down when challenged, when subtly humiliated in front of others. But Alara, she was standing tall, unshaken. And Monica couldn't stand it. Alara stepped forward, prepared to brush past. But Monica quickly shifted in front of her, blocking her path once more. You're holding up the aisle, Monica said coolly. I suggest you wait. Alara clenched her jaw, but she didn't argue. She simply stepped back, her gaze lingering on Monica for a brief moment before she turned and returned to her seat. Behind them, Vivian, who had watched the entire exchange unfold, let out an audible sigh. That was pathetic, she muttered, just loud enough for Monica to hear. Monica ignored her. She hadn't won this round. But she wasn't done yet. Not even close. Because now, she wasn't just irritated, she was determined. And the next time Alara stepped out of line, Monica wouldn't just use words to put her in her place. Even after Alara had returned to her seat, the tension in the cabin didn't fade. She could feel Monica's presence lingering nearby, hovering like a storm cloud just waiting to unleash its full force. The flight attendant moved through the aisle, her face composed, but her movements sharper than before. There was something simmering beneath the surface. A quiet frustration. A grudge she refused to let go. Vivian leaned in slightly toward Alara, her voice just above a whisper. She's got a problem with you, she murmured, taking a slow sip of wine. And she's not even trying to hide it. Alara gave a small nod but didn't respond. She had encountered people like Monica before, people who mistook their uniforms and titles for power. They weren't worth arguing with. But something told her this wasn't over. Monica wasn't going to let this go. The flight continued as attendants served meals and passengers settled into the rhythm of the journey. The atmosphere seemed to return to normal. But it was only temporary. A soft chime rang through the cabin. A passenger had pressed the assistance button. Monica, still restless, immediately noticed the blinking light. Her lips curled into a thin smile. This was her chance. She walked over slowly, adjusting her uniform before stopping beside Alara's seat. Yes? She asked, her voice clipped. Alara looked up confused. I didn't call for assistance. Monica's smile didn't waver. Are you sure? She asked. The call light above your seat is on. Alara's brow furrowed. She hadn't touched the button. Monica let out a dramatic sigh, shaking her head slightly. If you don't need help, please be mindful not to press buttons you don't understand. A few passengers turned their heads, catching the remark. From across the aisle, Vivian let out a quiet chuckle. That's interesting, she mused. I saw her sitting still the whole time. You sure the button wasn't, I don't know, pressed by accident? From somewhere else? Monica's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled slightly at her sides. I don't make mistakes like that, she said smoothly. If the light came from this seat, then it must have been pressed. Alara met her gaze steadily. I didn't press it, she said firmly. Monica tilted her head, her forced smile still in place. Well, next time, just be careful. She reached over and turned off the call light before stepping away, her movements slow and deliberate. Alara watched her walk off, her patience wearing thinner by the minute. She hadn't touched the button, and she had a strong feeling that Monica knew that too. But why? Why was she so determined to prove that Alara didn't belong? Vivian sighed, swirling her wine glass. She's playing games with you. Alara exhaled slowly. I know. Vivian studied her for a moment. You're not going to let her win, are you? Alara's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest. No, she murmured. I'm not. But she didn't have to do anything. Because soon, Monica would push too far. And when she did, there would be no turning back. Monica moved through the cabin, her expression neutral as she attended to passengers. But no matter how many drinks she served, how many requests she fulfilled, her mind kept circling back to Alara. She hated how unaffected the woman seemed. Most passengers would have apologized by now, embarrassed by the constant scrutiny, desperate to avoid conflict. But Alara? She sat there, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her expression giving nothing away. And the more composed she remained, the more it irritated Monica. A few rows away, Nathan smirked, leaning toward Vivian. She's really got it out for her, huh? Vivian rolled her eyes. It's getting embarrassing at this point. Meanwhile, in the galley, Sophie was refilling a tray of drinks when Monica stormed in, her movements tense. Sophie glanced up, noting the frustration radiating off her colleague. You okay? She asked cautiously. Monica grabbed a cloth and wiped at an invisible stain on the counter. She's getting under my skin, she muttered. Sophie frowned. Who? Monica didn't answer right away. She didn't need to. Sophie had seen the way Monica kept hovering near Alara's seat, searching for reasons to challenge her. Monica, Sophie said carefully, just let it go. She's a business-class passenger, just like everyone else. You checked her ticket. Maybe stop making such a big deal out of it. Monica's jaw tightened. You don't get it, she snapped. She doesn't act like she belongs here. Sophie crossed her arms. Or maybe, she said slowly, you don't like the fact that she does. Monica shot her a sharp glare but didn't respond. Sophie sighed, shaking her head as she grabbed the tray. Just do your job and leave her alone. The last thing you need is a complaint against you. But a complaint wasn't what Monica was worried about. She wanted Alara to break. To show even a flicker of discomfort. To admit that she wasn't like the others in business class. And when she saw Alara stand up a few minutes later, adjusting the strap of her purse again, Monica didn't think twice before following her. This time, she wasn't going to let her walk away without consequences. Because in her mind, Alara had already crossed a line. And Monica was ready to put her back in her place. Alara made her way toward the restroom, her steps steady despite Monica's constant scrutiny. She wasn't the type to let things bother her easily. But it was clear now, Monica wasn't just being rude. She was determined to humiliate her. Alara reached for the restroom handle. But before she could open it, a sharp grip closed around her wrist. Her head snapped to the side. Monica. The flight attendant's nails dug slightly into Alara's skin before she finally let go. Not so fast, Monica said smoothly, stepping in front of the door. Alara's eyes met hers. Monica's expression was firm, her body blocking the entrance. This restroom is currently unavailable. Alara's gaze flicked to the occupied vacant sign. It was green. The restroom was empty. It doesn't look unavailable to me, she said evenly. Monica's smile was tight. It is now. Nearby passengers turned their heads slightly, sensing another confrontation. Alara could feel their gazes, but she refused to react. Then, a voice cut through the tension. Monica. Both women turned as Sophie approached, her brows furrowed. What's going on? Monica barely turned her head. I was just explaining that this restroom is off limits for now. Sophie frowned, her gaze flicking to the vacant sign. Since when? Monica's jaw clenched slightly. Since now. Sophie stared at her for a moment before shifting her gaze to Alara, clearly sensing that something was off. Monica, she said in a lower voice, it's just a restroom. Let her use it. Monica exhaled sharply through her nose. There are restrooms in economy. A hush fell over the small space. Alara felt the weight of those words settle in. And she wasn't the only one. Even Sophie's expression shifted, her eyes darkening. Her voice was sharp now. What is your problem? Monica finally turned to face her fully, her frustration boiling over. My problem, Monica scoffed. My problem is that she doesn't belong in business class, Sophie. Look at her. The words left her mouth louder than she had intended. A few passengers audibly gasped. From her seat, Vivian let out an exaggerated scoff. "Wow," she muttered, shaking her head. She finally said it out loud. Alara stood still, her heartbeat steady. Monica was unraveling, and she knew it. But before she could say another word, everything was about to change. The moment happened so fast, no one saw it coming. Without warning, without thinking, Monica's hand shot out. The sharp crack of the slap echoed through the cabin. Passengers gasped. The entire aisle fell into stunned silence. Alara's head turned slightly from the force, a burning sensation spreading across her cheek. But she didn't stumble. She didn't step back. She simply turned her gaze back to Monica. Unshaken, unreadable. Around them, passengers gaped in disbelief. Sophie's hand flew to her mouth, her face pale. A businessman in the next row, Marcus, stared, his pen slipping from his fingers onto his tray table. For the first time, Monica realized exactly what she had done. Her breath hitched, her hands still frozen in the air. Silence stretched. Then, slowly, Alara lifted her hand. Not to retaliate, not to touch her cheek, not even to acknowledge the pain. She simply reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. Monica's stomach dropped. Because Alara wasn't calling the police. She was calling someone much, much worse. The entire business class cabin sat frozen. The sharp sound of the slap still lingered in the air, leaving a tension so thick no one dared to move. Even Monica's own breathing had become uneven. Her fingers trembled slightly, the reality of what she had just done crashing down on her. This wasn't just a mistake. This was a disaster. And Alara? She wasn't shaken. She wasn't even angry. She calmly unlocked her phone, her fingers moving with deliberate slowness. Passengers nearby watched in silence, their eyes flicking between her and Monica, waiting to see what would happen next. It was Sophie who found her voice first. "Monica," she hissed, her face pale. "What the hell did you just do?" Monica's throat felt dry. Her mind scrambled for an excuse, a justification, something. But there was nothing. There was no way to take it back. Monica started, but the words felt weak even as they left her lips. Alara's phone rang, once, twice. Then a voice answered on the other end, deep, controlled, but with something dangerous underneath it. "Are you okay?" Monica's breath caught. She recognized that voice. Alara tilted her head slightly, keeping her gaze locked on Monica as she spoke into the phone. "I'm fine," she said, her voice calm as ever. "But there's been an incident." Monica swallowed hard. In the row beside them, Marcus leaned forward slightly, intrigued. Vivian let out a low whistle. "Oh, you're in trouble," she muttered, shaking her head. Monica took a step back, her face drained of color. She hadn't asked for this woman's full name, hadn't even considered it. But now, the way Alara spoke, her composure, her unshakable confidence, it sent a chill through Monica's spine. The voice on the phone spoke again. "Tell me everything." Alara's lips curled slightly, not a smirk, not arrogance, just a quiet understanding that everything was about to change. "A flight attendant just slapped me," she said simply. A silence followed on the other end of the call. Then, the voice asked only one question. "Which flight are you on?" Monica's breathing quickened. Sophie glanced between them, sensing the shift in the air. "Alara," she said carefully, her voice laced with concern. "Who are you calling?" Alara's gaze flicked to Sophie for only a moment before she answered. "My husband." Gasps rippled through the cabin. Nathan, the man who had whispered about Alara not belonging, straightened in his seat, suddenly realizing he had been very, very wrong. Monica's lips parted slightly, confusion, panic. "Your husband?" she repeated. Alara didn't break eye contact. She continued speaking into the phone, her tone shifting slightly, softening, just a fraction. "Yes, love," she murmured. "I'm on flight 762. Another pause. Then the voice on the phone said something that made Monica's stomach twist violently. "I'll handle it." Then the call ended. Alara placed the phone back into her purse. Then, without another word, she stepped past Monica, her posture as poised as ever. Monica's voice came out before she could stop herself. "Pooh." Her voice caught in her throat. She forced herself to ask, "Who is your husband?" Alara stopped, turned, and looked Monica directly in the eye. A small flicker of amusement danced in her gaze. Then she spoke two words. "Dominic Hayes." The moment the name left her lips, a visible shudder ran through Monica. Vivian let out a stunned laugh. "Oh, this is better than a movie." Monica stumbled slightly, gripping the edge of a seat for support. Dominic Hayes. the owner of Hayes International Airways, the man who built the airline from the ground up, a name that carried power, more power than Monica could ever dream of, and she had just slapped his wife. Monica's mind raced, searching for a way out. A way to undo what she had done. But there was no undoing this, because now, the entire plane knew, and worse, Dominic Hayes knew too. The weight of her mistake settled over her like a crushing force. Sophie let out a slow breath. "Oh, Monica," she murmured, "you just ruined your entire life." A visible shudder ran through Monica. Vivian let out a stunned laugh, shaking her head. "Oh, this is better than a movie," she muttered, taking another sip of wine. Monica stumbled slightly, gripping the side of a seat for support. Dominic Hayes, the owner of Hayes International Airways, the man who had built an empire in the aviation industry, a name that carried power, more power than she could ever dream of, and she had just slapped his wife. Monica's mind raced, searching for a way out, a way to undo what she had just done. But there was no undoing it, because now, the entire plane knew, and worse, Dominic Hayes knew too. The weight of her mistake settled over her like a crushing force. Sophie let out a slow breath. "Oh, Monica," she murmured, "you just ruined your entire life." Monica didn't answer. She couldn't, because she knew Sophie was right. It felt like the air had been knocked out of her lungs. She stood there, frozen, her mind scrambling for a way to fix the disaster she had just created. She had humiliated this woman, had slapped her in front of an entire cabin full of witnesses. She had assumed Alara was a nobody, some woman who had stumbled into business class by mistake. But now, she knew the truth. Alara wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't just some nobody. She was the wife of Dominic Hayes, the man who controlled the very airline Monica worked for. The realization made Monica's stomach twist violently. Passengers murmured amongst themselves, eyes flicking between Monica and Alara. Some were in disbelief, others exchanged knowing looks, as if they had expected something like this to happen. Nathan, the man who had been so quick to assume Alara didn't belong, suddenly looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat. Vivian, on the other hand, she looked thoroughly entertained. She swirled the last of her wine in her glass, sipping with the satisfaction of someone watching karma play out in real time. Sophie's face was unreadable, but the disappointment in her eyes was clear. "Monica," she said in a quiet but firm voice, "you need to sit down, right now." Monica barely heard her. Her hands trembled slightly as she tried to collect herself. This couldn't be happening. She had worked for this airline for years. She had built a reputation, earned the respect of her colleagues. And now, all of that was hanging by a thread. Because of one slap. No, she thought wildly. It wasn't just the slap. It was everything. The questioning, the humiliation. The way she had tried to force Alara to prove she belonged. And worst of all, she had done it loudly, in front of an audience, making sure everyone knew she didn't think Alara deserved to be here. And now, everyone was watching her downfall. The sudden ding of the intercom made Monica flinch. Then, the captain's voice echoed through the cabin. "Miss Monica, please report to the cockpit immediately." Monica's stomach dropped further. Vivian let out a low chuckle, shaking her head. "Oh, this just keeps getting better," she muttered under her breath. Monica swallowed hard, her throat dry. She forced her legs to move, stepping away from Alara and walking toward the front of the plane. It felt like every eye in the cabin was on her, burning into her back, waiting to see what would happen next. The moment she entered the cockpit, the door shut behind her with a soft click. The captain, a middle-aged man with years of experience, didn't look at her right away. His hands remained steady on the controls, but his jaw was tight. His eyes locked onto the panel in front of him, as if he were choosing his words carefully. But it wasn't the captain who spoke first. A voice crackled through the speaker of the in-flight communication screen. Monica's breath caught. The screen displayed a video call from an office back on the ground. A man with sharp features stared back at her, his dark eyes unreadable. Monica's stomach twisted. She knew exactly who he was, one of Dominic Hayes' senior executives. The man's voice was cold when he spoke. "Monica," he said, "are you aware of who you just assaulted?" Monica's mouth opened. No words came out. The executive's expression didn't change. "I'll make this brief," he continued. "Mr. Hayes has been informed of your actions." Monica's breath hitched. "We've been given direct orders," he continued. Effective immediately, you are removed from duty for the remainder of this flight. Monica felt like the ground had been ripped from beneath her feet. Upon landing, security will be waiting to escort you off the aircraft, he continued. You will be placed under disciplinary review. And I strongly suggest you prepare a formal statement, because if Mr. Hayes chooses to pursue this further, you won't just lose your job, you will never work in this industry again. The walls of the cockpit seemed to close in around Monica. She felt trapped. The weight of the executive's words still rang in her ears. You will never work in this industry again. She had spent years walking through airports with confidence, her uniform always crisp, her presence always commanding respect. Now she was just another disgraced employee, one whose fate was no longer in her own hands. The captain, who had remained silent for most of the call, finally turned his head slightly. His voice was quiet but firm. You should return to your seat, Monica, while you still have one. The words hit her like a slap. Monica couldn't breathe. She wanted to plead, to explain, to say something, anything that might undo the damage. But there was nothing to say. She had done this to herself. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the cockpit, her hands cold, her face burning with humiliation. As she re-entered the business class cabin, she immediately felt the shift in the air. Passengers who had once barely acknowledged her presence now watched her closely, some with curiosity, others with satisfaction. She avoided their eyes, walking stiffly past them, trying to hold on to whatever dignity she had left. Then she saw Alara, still seated, still calm, still composed. She hadn't smirked, hadn't gloated, hadn't done anything at all to acknowledge Monica's downfall. And that was what made it worse. Monica hesitated near her seat, her body unwilling to move forward. She wanted to say something, to justify, to defend herself. But before she could, a quiet chime rang through the cabin. One she had never wanted to hear in this context. The seatbelt sign dinged on. They were beginning their descent. Her fate was waiting for her on the ground, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. The plane continued to descend, and with each passing second, Monica felt the walls closing in. The steady hum of the engines, the faint flickering of overhead lights, the weight of what awaited her at the airport, all of it pressed down on her like a crushing force. She had spent years believing she was untouchable, years believing her uniform and authority meant she would always be respected. Now, for the first time, she felt small. She returned to the galley, her steps slower than before. Sophie was already there, arms crossed, watching her carefully. The moment Monica stepped inside, Sophie let out a breath, shaking her head. "They're waiting for you," she said simply. Monica pressed her lips together. She already knew who was waiting. Security, the airline's executives, and worst of all, Dominic Hayes himself. Sophie's voice softened. "Do you even realize how badly you messed up?" Monica let out a bitter breath, gripping the edge of the counter. "I know," Sophie sighed, rubbing her temples. "No, I don't think you do." Her voice was sharper now. "This isn't just about losing your job, Monica. This isn't some minor complaint that'll get buried after a few meetings with HR." She folded her arms, her expression hardening. "You put your hands on the wife of one of the most powerful men in the airline industry. Do you have any idea what that means?" Monica closed her eyes for a moment. She did know. It meant she hadn't just ruined her career. She had destroyed any chance of recovering from this. Airlines talked. Airports talked. One mistake like this could follow her forever. And what made it worse, what made her stomach twist painfully, was that she had done it over something so stupid. It wasn't just an impulse. It wasn't just a mistake. It had been her pride, her arrogance, her own assumptions. She had looked at Alara and assumed she was nothing. But now, Alara was the one who held all the power. Sophie's voice softened again. "I don't know what's going to happen when we land," she exhaled, "but I suggest you start thinking about what you're going to say." Monica remained silent. "Because right now you have two choices." Sophie met her eyes. "Own up to what you did." A pause. "Or let this be the end of you." Monica didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. The descent continued. Back in the business class cabin, Alara quietly buckled her seatbelt as the flight attendants made their final rounds. She could feel the energy in the air. Some passengers snuck glances at her. Others were too embarrassed to look in her direction after watching what had happened. Nathan, the man who had once smugly assumed she didn't belong, now sat stiffly in his seat, his eyes fixed on the window as if wishing he could disappear. Vivian, on the other hand, seemed fully entertained. She occasionally stole glances toward Monica whenever she passed, her expression unreadable but satisfied. But Alara? She wasn't interested in their reactions. Her focus was elsewhere. She reached for her phone again, checking for updates. A message from Dominic popped up on her screen. She clicked it open. Dominic. Security is ready. They'll escort her off the plane first. Wait for me at the terminal. Alara exhaled slowly, locking the screen. She wasn't angry anymore. She didn't feel vindictive. She didn't need revenge, because Monica had already destroyed herself. All she had to do now was wait. Alara exhaled slowly, locking her phone screen. It wasn't anger she felt, not anymore. It was something else. Monica had tried to humiliate her, had judged her based on appearance, had even resorted to violence. But in the end, she had only destroyed herself. Alara didn't need revenge. She didn't need to demand justice. She just needed to wait. The plane dipped lower, the runway now visible through the oval windows. The intercom crackled. The captain's voice filled the cabin. Cabin crew, prepare for landing. A hush fell over the passengers. Monica forced herself to stand tall, moving through the aisles one last time. She could feel their eyes on her, not with respect, not with the usual polite indifference, but with curiosity, with quiet judgment. She had started this flight as the one in control. Now she was the one everyone pitied. The wheels touched down. A heavy silence settled over her. Her time was up. And she had never been more terrified in her entire life. As the aircraft slowed, Monica gripped the side of a seat, her breathing shallow. The usual sense of relief that came with landing wasn't there. Instead, a wave of dread crashed over her. Suffocating, inescapable. The passengers weren't just waiting to disembark, they were waiting to see what would happen next. Alara remained still, her seatbelt fastened. Her hands rested lightly in her lap. She didn't look at Monica, didn't acknowledge the growing panic on the flight attendant's face. She didn't have to. Monica had already unraveled on her own. The intercom crackled again. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our destination. The local time is 3:45 p.m. For your safety, please remain seated until we reach the gate and the seatbelt sign is turned off. Thank you for flying with us. The seatbelt sign remained on, but Monica knew it wouldn't be for long. She glanced toward the front of the plane, where the jet bridge would soon be connected. But instead of the usual crew waiting outside, she saw them. Two uniformed security officers stood just beyond the glass window of the jet bridge, their hands clasped in front of them, their expressions unreadable. They were waiting for her. A cold shiver ran down her spine. Sophie appeared beside her, stopping just behind her shoulder. She had seen them too. Her expression was grim. You should start preparing yourself, she murmured. Monica's throat tightened. I can explain. Sophie turned to her sharply. Explain what? Her voice was like steel. That you spent an entire flight harassing a passenger because you assumed she was beneath you? That you slapped her in front of an entire cabin full of witnesses? She exhaled, shaking her head. Monica, she said, voice firm. There is no explaining this, there's just accountability. Monica's fingers curled at her sides. The plane came to a complete stop, and a moment later, the ding of the seatbelt sign turning off filled the cabin. The usual rustling of passengers gathering their belongings began. But something was different. The usual rush to the aisles was absent. Everyone was still watching. The flight attendant near the door hesitated. Her fingers hovered over the intercom button. Then, she pressed it. Miss Monica, please proceed to the front of the aircraft immediately. The words cut through the silence. Heads turned. Some passengers openly stared. Others pretended to be occupied with their luggage. But they were listening closely. Vivian leaned back in her seat, shaking her head with an amused sigh. Well, this is awkward. Monica's legs felt like lead as she took a step forward. Each movement felt heavier than the last, like she was dragging the weight of her own downfall with her. As she walked past Alara's seat, she slowed slightly, expecting, hoping for some reaction. A glance, a smirk, anything. But Alara remained still. She didn't gloat, didn't look satisfied, didn't look angry. She simply looked at Monica with the same composed expression she had worn throughout the flight. It wasn't the look of someone who wanted revenge. It was the look of someone who had already won. Shame burned through Monica as she quickly turned away, walking toward the front of the aircraft. The flight crew near the door stepped aside as she approached. Their expressions were carefully neutral. No one spoke. No one needed to. The door opened. The security officers stepped inside. One of them, a man with a firm, steady gaze, spoke first. "Monica Carter?" Her mouth went dry. She swallowed hard. "Yes," she choked out. The officer gave a small nod. "You need to come with us." A murmur rippled through the passengers. The air in the cabin felt thicker than before. Monica hesitated, but she had no choice. Her career, her future, her entire life had just crashed and burned. And now, there was nothing left to do except face the consequences. Monica swallowed hard, her throat dry as she nodded stiffly. Her hands shook as she reached for the pin on her uniform. With slow, deliberate movements, she unfastened her flight attendant badge, the one she had worn with pride for years. For a moment, she just held it, as if gripping it tightly enough could somehow undo the damage, as if keeping it in her hand meant she still had a shred of authority left. But it was gone. Everything was gone. With a deep, trembling breath, she forced herself to let go. The small emblem of her career landed on the tray table with a soft clink. Then, without another word, she stepped onto the jet bridge. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't walking through an airport as an employee in control. She was walking off the plane as a disgrace. And on the other side of that jet bridge, Dominic Hayes was waiting. Monica's heartbeat thundered in her ears. The air inside the jet bridge felt colder than the aircraft. Or maybe it was just the chill settling deep within her bones. Her once confident stride had become hesitant. Her body stiffened with the weight of her actions. Every step forward felt like stepping toward the inevitable. She had never been on this side of authority before. Never been the one escorted. Never been the one scrutinized. Never been the one at risk of losing everything. Now, she was. The security officers flanked her on either side. Their movements were steady, professional, but their presence alone made her feel suffocated. She had spent years issuing commands. Now, she was the one being ordered around. Her mind spun as she approached the terminal exit. Then, through the glass doors, a figure came into view. Tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a dark, impeccably tailored suit. Dominic Hayes. Even standing completely still, he commanded attention. Passengers passing by instinctively lowered their voices. Airport staff straightened their postures. Even the security officers escorting her seemed to stand a little taller. Monica had never met him in person, but she had heard his name whispered countless times. The executives spoke of him with deep respect. Employees talked about him like he was a legend. He wasn't the type of man who needed to raise his voice to be heard. And now, she had to face him. Her stomach twisted painfully as she stepped through the doors, her feet halting just a few steps away from him. The security officers stepped back slightly, giving them space. But they still stood close enough to remind her that she wasn't free to walk away. A long, agonizing silence settled between them. Dominic said nothing at first. His sharp gaze swept over her, studying her with an unsettling level of calm. Monica almost wished he would yell. At least then, she would know what he was thinking. But he didn't. He just stood there. Watching, calculating. She knew he had already made his decision, and whatever it was, it wouldn't be in her favor. She opened her mouth, desperate to say something, anything that might fix the damage she had done. "Mr. Hayes?" He lifted a hand, silencing her instantly. Monica swallowed hard, her words dying in her throat. His voice when he finally spoke was low but firm. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Monica's fingers trembled at her sides. She wanted to defend herself, to say she had made a mistake, that she hadn't meant for things to escalate the way they did, but she knew better than to insult his intelligence with excuses. Still, her voice came out in a whisper. "It wasn't personal. I didn't know who she was." A flicker of something dangerous passed through Dominic's eyes. "You didn't need to know who she was," he said evenly. "You only needed to treat her with basic respect." Monica's breath caught. "You judged her based on nothing but her appearance. You questioned her presence in business class. You humiliated her in front of other passengers. And when you couldn't force her to react," his voice hardened, "you struck her." His words were sharp, slicing through whatever weak defenses she had left. Monica's entire body felt cold. It was, she hesitated. I lost my temper, I know that. And I regret. Dominic took a single step closer. His presence towered over her, making her feel unbearably small. Your regret means nothing, he said, his tone eerily calm. Not to me. A pause. Not to my wife. Monica's stomach twisted painfully. Dominic's voice remained steady. I built this airline on the foundation of respect and professionalism. Thousands of employees work under my name, and every single one of them is a reflection of the company I created. His gaze bore into her. And today, you prove to be the kind of person who does not belong here. Monica's breath grew unsteady. Dominic turned slightly. A man in a gray suit, one of his executives, stepped forward. In his hands, he held a folder. Without a word, he handed it to Dominic. Dominic flipped it open, pulled out a single document. Monica barely had time to process it before he extended it toward her. Effective immediately, Dominic Hayes said, his voice steady and cold. Your employment with this airline is terminated. The words struck Monica harder than the slap she had given Alara. Her vision blurred as she stared at the document he held out to her. The official letter, stamped with the Hayes International Airways logo, outlined her dismissal in precise, unfeeling words. No room for negotiation, no offer of suspension, no chance for redemption. This was final. Please. The word escaped her lips as a whisper, barely audible. I've worked here for 10 years. This job, it's all I have. Her voice cracked, the reality of it sinking into her bones. Dominic's expression didn't change. You should have thought about that, he said, his tone calm yet cutting, before you let your arrogance destroy it. Tears burned in the corners of Monica's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Not here. Not in front of him. Not in front of Alara. Not in front of the entire airport. Dominic turned slightly. Security will escort you out of the airport, he added. Your belongings will be sent to you. You are not to enter any of our facilities again. Monica felt like she was standing on the edge of a cliff, teetering over a void. One wrong step and she would lose herself completely. Her breathing shallowed. Is there anything I can do? Her voice was desperate now. Dominic studied her for a long moment. Then he let out a quiet sigh. That depends, he said. Are you asking how to fix your career? Monica hesitated. Then she nodded slightly. Then no, Dominic said, bluntly. There is nothing you can do. The words landed like a stone in her stomach. Her heart cracked. But his voice was quieter now. If you're asking how to fix yourself. Monica's eyes flickered with hope. Dominic's gaze didn't waver. Then maybe. Start by asking why you thought a woman in a simple dress didn't deserve to be treated like a human being. Monica felt like the breath had been knocked out of her. She wanted to argue, to insist that it hadn't been like that she hadn't meant to be cruel. But deep down, she knew. She had seen Alara as less. And now, she had paid the price for it. The weight of everything came crashing down on her. The reality that she had lost her job, that she would never work in this industry again, that she had humiliated herself in front of an entire plane full of people, all because she had assumed someone was beneath her. She didn't respond. She couldn't. Dominic gave a small nod to the security officers. Take her out. Monica's chest tightened as they stepped forward. Her legs felt weak, but she forced herself to move. Her footsteps were heavy as she was led through the terminal. Passengers who had witnessed the incident were already scattered through the airport. Some glanced at her as she passed. Some whispered. Others shook their heads. And then Vivian, walking toward baggage claim, smirking as Monica passed. That was hard to watch, Vivian said, voice dripping with false sympathy. She paused, then added with a shrug, well, for you anyway. Monica clenched her fists, kept her head down, and kept walking. She had started this flight believing she was in control. Now she was nothing but a disgraced former employee, walking out of the very airport she had once ruled over. And Alara, she had never raised her voice, never lifted a hand against her, but she had won. And the worst part, Monica knew she deserved it. Her feet dragged against the polished airport floor. The weight of her downfall pressed on her shoulders like a boulder. She had been in this airport hundreds of times. She had walked these same halls with her head high, her uniform pristine, her presence commanding respect. But today, she was being escorted out like a criminal. The security officers remained silent as they walked beside her. Their expressions were blank, unreadable. They weren't rough with her. Didn't grab her arms, didn't force her to move faster. They didn't need to. She had already lost. The humiliation of being watched, of passengers whispering, of employees averting their eyes, of ground staff realizing that she was no longer one of them. That was punishment enough. Her mind raced for solutions, for a way to salvage something from the wreckage. Would another airline take her? Could she spin the situation in her favor? But every thought ended in the same sinking realization. This wasn't just about losing her job. This was about losing everything. For 10 years, she had worked at Hayes International Airways. She had built her career here, climbed through the ranks, believed she was untouchable, and in less than a few hours, she had destroyed it all, with her own arrogance. As they neared the exit, she heard footsteps approaching from behind. Monica. She flinched at the familiar voice, turned slightly. Sophie, her former colleague, because that's what she was now. Now a former employee, Sophie stood a few feet away. Her expression was conflicted. Not angry, not gloating, just tired. In her hands she held a small bag. Monica's personal belongings, the ones that had been taken from her before she was escorted off the plane. Monica swallowed hard, dread settling in her stomach. She wasn't sure what Sophie was about to say, but she knew it wouldn't be comforting. Sophie stepped forward, holding out the bag. You didn't have to let it get this far. She shook her head. Her voice wasn't cruel, it wasn't mocking, it was just exhausted. Monica took the bag slowly, her fingers curled around the strap, holding onto it like an anchor. I know, she admitted, her voice hoarse. Sophie sighed. I told you to let it go. Monica exhaled sharply, looking down. I thought I was right. Sophie gave a dry, humorless laugh. And now? She challenged. Monica hesitated. Then, forcing herself to meet Sophie's eyes, she said, Now I know I wasn't. Sophie studied her for a long moment, then finally she gave a small nod. It's too late for this job, Monica, she said. Her voice was firm, but not unkind. But maybe it's not too late for you to figure out why you did what you did. Monica's throat tightened. There were so many things she could have said, so many ways she could have tried to defend herself, but there was nothing left to defend. She had assumed Alara was beneath her. She had humiliated her, questioned her, disrespected her, and when that hadn't been enough, she had hit her. But why? Because she hadn't been able to accept the idea that someone like Alara could belong in business class? Because she had spent years serving wealthy, entitled passengers and had convinced herself that only people who looked the part deserved to be there? Because she had been so certain she knew who belonged and who didn't? And today, she had been proven wrong in the most painful way possible. And she deserved to be proven wrong. Sophie took a step back. Take care of yourself, Monica. And with that, she turned and walked away. Monica watched her go, feeling a strange hollowness settle inside her chest. For the first time in her life, she had no uniform, no title, no position of authority to cling to. She was just Monica. And she wasn't sure who that was without the power she once held. The security officers motioned for her to continue walking. She did. Just as she was about to step through the automatic exit doors, a voice made her entire body go still. That's her. Monica turned her head slowly. Dread curled in her stomach. Standing a few feet away was Alara. Her posture was still composed, her expression unreadable. But this time, she wasn't alone. Standing beside her, towering over everyone in his dark tailored suit, was Dominic Hayes. Monica felt herself shrink under his presence. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't threatening her. But the quiet intensity in his eyes was worse. She forced herself to straighten her spine. Mr. Hayes, she started. Her voice was weak. He didn't respond. Not at first. Instead, he turned to Alara. Do you want to say anything to her? His voice was calm, controlled, final. Alara studied Monica for a long moment. Monica braced herself. This was it. This was where Alara would finally say something cutting. Something that would burn itself into Monica's memory forever. Maybe she'd tell her she was worthless, that she would never recover from this, that she would never escape what she did today. But Alara didn't do any of that. Instead, she tilted her head slightly and said, I don't need to. Monica felt like she had been struck again. Alara didn't need to say anything, because the silence, the weight of her composed gaze, the way she had walked through this entire situation with dignity, that was enough. Monica had tried to break her, had tried to humiliate her, had tried to force her into reacting. But in the end, the only person who had been destroyed was herself. The doors behind Monica slid open with a soft hiss. The cold air from outside rushed in. The security officers motioned for her to step forward. Monica swallowed hard. Her heart pounded as she turned away from the couple for the last time. And as she walked out of the airport, she knew one thing for certain. She had spent her entire career believing she had the power to decide who belonged. But today, she had learned the most painful lesson of all. Power was never about the uniform. It was about the way you treated people, and she had failed. The airport doors slid shut behind her, cutting her off from the world she had once controlled. The moment she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap, one that didn't just sting her skin, but her pride, her arrogance, her entire existence. Everything she had spent years building, gone, and yet the world moved on. Travelers wheeled their suitcases past her, taxis pulled up to collect passengers, airport staff went about their routines. No one cared who she was. No one cared that just hours ago she had walked these halls as a senior flight attendant, commanding respect. Because now, she was no one. Monica's hands trembled as she clutched the strap of her small bag. Her career was gone. Her reputation was shattered. The life she had spent 10 years building had crumbled in a single flight, all because of a mistake. No, she corrected herself bitterly. Not a mistake. A choice. She had chosen to judge Alara. She had chosen to treat her as if she were beneath her. She had chosen to strike her when she didn't get the reaction she wanted. And now, she was paying the price for it. Her legs felt weak as she made her way toward the taxi stand. The security officers had left her at the curb. Their job was done. She wasn't being arrested. Dominic Hayes hadn't pressed charges, even though he very well could have. And that, somehow, made it worse, because he could have destroyed her. But instead, he had let her do it to herself. Monica swallowed hard as she reached the front of the taxi line. The driver barely spared her a glance as he popped open the trunk. She tossed her bag inside and slid into the back seat. Her mind was still spinning. "Where to?" the driver asked, his voice indifferent. Monica opened her mouth, then closed it. Where was she supposed to go? For years, the airline had been her home. She had spent more time in airports and airplanes than she had in her own apartment. The job had been everything to her, her identity, her power, her entire life. And now that it was gone, she realized she had nothing outside of it. Her throat tightened. "Just drive," she murmured. The driver shrugged and pulled out of the airport. The city blurred past her window. Her mind kept replaying everything. The way passengers had watched her downfall. The way Sophie had looked at her, not with pity, not with anger, but with disappointment. And then, Dominic Hayes. He had barely spoken a handful of words to her. And yet, in just those few moments, he had dismantled everything she had once believed about herself. And then, there was Alara. Alara had never raised her voice, never tried to humiliate her back, never needed to retaliate. She had been calm, steady. And somehow, that had been more powerful than anything Monica had ever seen before. Monica had spent so many years believing that power came from status, from authority, from being in control. But Alara had shown her a different kind of power, the kind that didn't need to prove itself, the kind that didn't need to demand respect, because it had already been earned. Monica had spent her entire career looking down on people she thought were beneath her. And today, she had learned the truth. The only person beneath anyone was her. The car hit a red light. For the first time since stepping off that plane, Monica allowed herself to truly feel the weight of what had happened. Her hands curled into fists on her lap. She had lost everything. And the worst part, she had done it to herself. The taxi moved through the city, but Monica barely registered the passing streets. She caught a glimpse of herself in the window. A ghost of the woman she had been just hours ago. She used to walk with confidence, with purpose, with the certainty that she was untouchable. But now, she sat in the back of a taxi with nothing but a bag of personal belongings and a career she had thrown away with her own arrogance. Her phone buzzed in her lap. For a brief moment, a cruel part of her hoped it was someone from the airline. Maybe a chance to fix this. Maybe a last-minute reversal of her fate. But when she turned the screen over, Reality hit her like a punch to the gut. A news notification flashed across the screen. Senior flight attendant from Hayes International Airways fired mid-flight for misconduct against CEO's wife. Monica's stomach twisted. Her finger hovered over the article. She didn't want to open it. She already knew what it would say. But she tapped it anyway. The details spilled onto the screen. Her name, her actions, her humiliation, all written out for the entire world to see. Passengers had already begun sharing their experiences online, recounting every moment of what had happened, her questioning of Alara, the demeaning comments, and of course, the slap, the one that had sealed her fate. Monica stared at the screen, her vision blurring. The entire world was watching her fall. And this time, there was no getting back up. The video was attached. Monica's finger hovered over the play button. She already knew what she would see, and yet, she pressed it anyway. The shaky footage began. There she was, standing in front of Alara in the aisle, her posture rigid with frustration. The camera caught everything, her sharp tone, the way she had tried to corner Alara with her words. And then, clear as day, the moment her hand flew across Alara's face, the entire cabin's collective gasp, the stunned silence, the disbelief. And then, the most painful part. Alara's reaction, or rather, her lack of it. She hadn't recoiled, hadn't lashed out, hadn't given Monica the satisfaction of seeing her break. She had simply stood there, calm, composed, unshaken. And in that moment, Monica hadn't just lost her temper, she had lost the fight. The video ended. Monica let out a shaky breath. She scrolled down to the comments. She shouldn't have. Wow, she really thought she could get away with that. This is why people in power need to be checked. Imagine how many others she's bullied before getting caught. Alara handled that like a queen. Her career is over. The words sank into her like knives. Monica had spent years believing she was in control. She had built her reputation on the idea that she knew how to handle people, how to command respect, how to be the authority figure in any situation. But in one moment of unchecked arrogance, she had proven to the world that she was nothing more than a bully. The car slowed to a stop. "Ma'am," the driver said, pulling her out of her daze. "We're here." Monica blinked, looking up. Her apartment building stood in front of her. But somehow, it felt unfamiliar, like it belonged to someone else. Someone who still had a career, someone who still had a future. She pulled out her wallet, her fingers shaking as she handed over the fare. The driver didn't look at her twice. She was just another passenger to him. Just another nobody. Monica stepped out of the car. Her feet felt unsteady as she approached the entrance. She could already picture it. Her landlord asking why she was home so early. Her neighbors whispering when they saw the news. The quiet, crushing reality of waking up tomorrow with no job to go to. As she reached for the door handle, her phone buzzed again. Another notification. A direct message. From Sophie. Monica hesitated. Then, she opened it. "Sophie, you were awful to her, Monica. But I still don't think you're beyond redemption. I hope you learned from this." Monica inhaled sharply, gripping her phone tightly. She didn't know if redemption was possible. She didn't know if she could ever fix the damage she had done. But for the first time, as she stepped inside and closed the door behind her, she realized something. She had spent her entire life believing power came from status, from control, from forcing others to recognize her authority. But real power, the kind that mattered, came from something else entirely. And the woman she had looked down on, the woman she had tried to humiliate, Alara had possessed it all along. Monica had lost everything. But maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something else. Something she should have learned a long time ago. The end.